This is Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Three nations spread across three different continents. But despite the distance, one alarming truth connects them all. They are collapsing in exactly the same way. And now, the symptoms are impossible to ignore. Let's begin where the cracks are turning into a full-blown collapse. Canada. In Canada today, the average family can't afford a home in their own country. Home ownership has crashed 31% in a single generation. Compounding this issue, foreign buyers now hold a significant stake in the Canadian property market, owning up to 13% of it, more than at any point in history. But Canada isn't alone. In Britain, the foundation of the middle class has been gutted. Manufacturing jobs gone, down 46% since 1990. And what did families get in return? The highest tax burden since World War II, all while public services fell apart. But this isn't just a British problem. Across the world, Australia is living the same nightmare, only deeper. There, a quiet takeover is underway. Foreign corporations now control 80% of the country's critical resources. And the dream of home ownership? Dead on arrival. Housing prices have soared by 500%. While wages crawled just 80%. Young Australians are being priced out of their future in their own country. And this pattern across continents, across governments, is no accident. This isn't just failure. It's not bad luck. It's called managed decline, and it's happening by design. And if you're watching this thinking it can't happen here, you need to pay attention, because these three nations are the test cases for what's already occurring throughout the Western world. What you're about to learn in this video will completely change how you understand what's happening to these once powerful nations, and why everyone should be deeply concerned about what comes next. The evidence is hiding in plain sight. Government documents, insider testimonies, and statistical patterns reveal a blueprint that's been quietly unfolding for decades. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Most people have no idea that the collapse of these three nations follows a familiar historical pattern. Every empire throughout history has fallen in a similar way, from the inside out. Take ancient Rome. Most think it fell to barbarian invasions, but Rome's real decline began internally, through economic inequality that mirror what's happening across Canada, the UK, and Australia right now. By the 2nd century AD, as Rome's expansion slowed, the wealthy elite created massive estates worked by imported labor. This destroyed local Roman farmers, the backbone of the Republic, who were crushed by debt and displacement. Sound familiar? It should. It's the exact same pattern unfolding today. When Roman reformers tried addressing these inequalities, they were eliminated. The elites chose to get rid of reformers rather than give up their power. A key point to remember as we look at what's happening in these modern nations. Just as Rome faced demographic collapse in its final years, these three nations are experiencing unprecedented population shifts. Despite Canada importing over 480,000 migrants in 2024 alone, its fertility rate has plummeted to just 1.48 children per woman, far below the replacement level. The UK's fertility rate has crashed to 1.44. While Australia's sits at 1.5. These countries aren't growing naturally. They're being artificially repopulated while their middle classes vanish, exactly as Rome's did before its fall. Managed decline might sound like boring corporate jargon, but it represents one of the most dangerous concepts in modern governance. Originally a business term for companies beyond saving, it evolved into a strategy where maintaining appearances takes priority over actual solutions. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented policy. The concept emerged during the 1980s in Britain when Margaret Thatcher's government advised that struggling industrial cities should be left to manage decline, controlling the collapse rather than preventing it. But what's truly shocking? This localized strategy has now been scaled up to the national level across Canada, the UK, and Australia. And the evidence isn't hidden. It's being announced openly. Don't believe it? Just look at the official messaging coming out of these governments. Their infamous "you'll own nothing and be happy" rhetoric wasn't just a meme. It's becoming the reality for millions. In Australia, government reports warn of a generation of forever renters, as home ownership slips out of reach for younger Australians. In Canada, nearly a third of people under 40 now say they expect to rent for life, according to recent surveys. And in the UK, a 2025 policy paper declared that the era of mass home ownership is over, signaling a long-term shift away from traditional property ownership. If this is your first time hearing about managed decline, prepare for a rude awakening, because once you understand how it works, you'll start seeing it everywhere. And nowhere is it more obvious than what's happening to Canada right now. Canada presents itself as a progressive, independent nation. The reality? It's being transformed back into a resource colony before our very eyes. Here's the playbook being implemented with frightening precision. First, domestic production gets strangled. Since 2009, business investment per worker in Canada has fallen by 20%, according to Statistics Canada, part of a broader trend tied to weaker market competition. Meanwhile, productivity has stagnated. Canada also recorded only 1.1% growth in real GDP per capita between 2014 and 2024, making it the second worst performer among 38 high-income countries. Second, the market gets flooded with new consumers. Canada now has the highest population growth in the G7, with 98% coming from immigration. This creates artificial GDP growth on paper while masking collapsing living standards. Meanwhile, the housing market has detached completely from economic reality. The average Toronto home now costs 11 times the median household income, more than double what financial experts consider remotely sustainable. Young Canadians aren't just unable to buy homes, they're spending up to 60% of their income on rent alone. The numbers are staggering. In March 2025, the average home price in Toronto hit $1.4 million, while Vancouver topped $1.7 million. Meanwhile, the median annual income in these cities hovers around $100,000. The math simply doesn't work anymore. And who's buying these properties? Foreign investors purchased tens of thousands of Canadian homes in recent years, with many left empty as pure investment vehicles. In fact, things got so bad that the federal government extended its foreign buyer ban to 2027. Statistics Canada data shows that non-residents owned about 7% of condos in British Columbia and 5.6% in Ontario. Clear evidence that investment demand has distorted housing supply. But wait, you might be thinking, isn't this just normal economic evolution? Think again. Most Canadians never even noticed when, back in 2015, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper publicly dismissed the middle-class prosperity platform as outdated. At the time, it sounded like political posturing. But in hindsight, it reads more like a warning, because what followed was a slow, calculated dismantling of the economic foundations that once upheld middle-class life in Canada. But here's the truly mind-blowing part. Canadian policymakers aren't failing to solve these problems. They're just ignoring the inevitable. When asked what happens if Canada's housing bubble finally bursts, analysts warned that it could trigger a financial crisis with ripple effects far beyond real estate. As Jacobin notes, Canada's housing market has become a tinderbox propped up by speculation, lax regulation, and blind faith in endless appreciation. If the bubble pops, it won't be a surprise. It'll be a disaster foretold. That's right, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. If you think Canada's managed decline is shocking, just wait until you see what they've done to Britain. It's the same blueprint, just a more advanced stage. And what you're about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew about modern economics. The United Kingdom, once the workshop of the world and birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, is now experiencing the fastest deindustrialization of any developed nation in history. British manufacturing, which represented 30% of GDP in the 1970s, has collapsed to just 9% today. Meanwhile, London's financial services sector has exploded, creating enormous wealth for a tiny minority while the rest of the country withers. What makes Britain's situation particularly alarming is the tax burden citizens now face. UK residents endure the highest taxation levels in over 70 years, higher than in countries like Canada, Switzerland, and Ireland, yet receive deteriorating public services in return. and it's forecast to get even worse. Government projections show the tax burden climbing further in the coming years, setting new post-war records while offering little relief to a population already feeling squeezed. A closer look at the numbers tells the shocking story. The average British worker now loses 30 to 40% of their income to taxes when all direct and indirect taxes are calculated. Yet National Health Service waiting lists have hit 7.8 million people as of March 2025. Schools are crumbling with an estimated £13.8 billion repair backlog. And over half of Britain's roads, more than 107,000 miles, are now less than 15 years away from total failure. Where's all that tax money actually going? The most revealing statistic might be this. While ordinary Britons face crushing tax burdens, more than 72% of Britain's top corporations pay less than 10% effective tax through complex offshore structures. And these same corporations are snapping up the very infrastructure being neglected by the government. Thames Water, the utility serving 15 million people, is now majority owned by foreign investment funds, including entities from Canada, Abu Dhabi, and China. While the company has not paid dividends to external shareholders since 2017, it has continued internal payments to service its substantial debt. Across England, water companies are projected to distribute £14.7 billion in dividends by 2030, even as customers face increasing bills to fund essential infrastructure repairs and address sewage pollution. But the most terrifying part of Britain's managed decline? The erasure of property ownership. Home ownership among Britons under 35 has plummeted from 65% in 1996 to just 28% today. Meanwhile, over 40% of rental properties are now owned by overseas investors who leave many units deliberately vacant as pure investment vehicles. And who's buying these properties? In London alone, nearly 27% of all homes sold in the first quarter of 2024 were snapped up by foreign buyers, 3% from the year before. Chinese and Middle Eastern investors led the surge, while American investment giants like BlackRock continued expanding their portfolios by acquiring large numbers of former public housing units. The message couldn't be clearer. Ordinary citizens are being transformed from property owners into permanent renters, from stakeholders into dependents. This isn't just the side effect, it's the primary objective. How far will they go with this plan? Look no further than Australia, the testing ground for the most extreme version of this economic transformation. What's happening there right now is a preview of what's coming for the rest of the Western world. Australia markets itself as the lucky country, a land of sunshine, prosperity, and opportunity. The reality? It's experiencing perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all three nations. Once a country with the highest home ownership in the world, Australia has seen that dream evaporate for an entire generation. Housing costs in major cities have skyrocketed, rising over 3,400% since 1975, while median full-time wages have grown just 1,183% in the same period. The culprit? A deliberate policy of hyper-immigration coupled with foreign investment incentives that have transformed housing from shelter into financial assets. Internal government documents from 2018 reveal Australian Treasury officials acknowledged this was creating a two-tier society, but proceeded anyway because it was generating significant wealth for existing property owners. Let's put some hard numbers to this transformation. In 2023, foreign buyers purchased around $15 billion worth of Australian real estate, enough to spark serious concern about housing access for locals. In response, the government is now implementing a 2-year ban on foreign acquisitions of established dwellings starting in April 2025. Meanwhile, immigration hit a historic high, with 547,200 new arrivals approved in 2023, even as building permits for new housing dropped by 8.5%. Elementary economics tells us what happens next: skyrocketing prices that make homeownership impossible for ordinary Australians. In Sydney, the median home now costs 15.3 times the median annual household income, officially making it more unaffordable than even notoriously expensive San Francisco or New York. But the housing crisis is just one piece of Australia's managed